Thank y'all for joining us tonight. Tonight we are going to be continuing our sermon series, Known or Famous. We're going to be looking at how some people in today's culture got famous or known or these kinds of things, and versus how God made his name known throughout the Old Testament and through these biblical times throughout the Bible. So tonight, if you've got your Bible, go ahead and turn over there to Daniel chapter 6. That's where we're going to be tonight. A very famous story of Daniel in the lion's den. But before we do that, I do want to just kind of talk a little bit about last week, and then we'll look at who we're going to be looking at who's famous today. So a little bit of recap. Last week we talked about Elijah and the dry bones. So God used Elijah to prophesy over these dry bones and this valley that had just all been all over the place, and God was able to restore these bones into real people, into living, breathing people. And it was just an absolutely incredible picture of this power that God has over death, over everything. He is the creator, the healer, the sustainer, and through that his name was made known throughout all of the other people groups that had enslaved most of Israel by that time. And so God was using that to make his name known versus Mr. Beast, who counted to 100,000, and that was really his big break moment. And just a very interesting dynamic as to what made him known today versus what God was known for back then. So tonight we're going to be looking at a very different kind of person rather than Mr. Beast. We're going to be looking at the artist known as Drake. He is a rap artist, hip-hop, R&B, a little bit of everything. But he is best known for his music. However, that's not where he got his start. Drake is actually a Canadian. His mother is a Canadian. That's where he lived with when his parents got divorced when he was about the age of 3, if I remember right. So his dad actually moved back down to the States. And so Drake really never saw any of his dad. But so Drake really got his big break rather during TV. So one of his friends' fathers was a casting director. And so he, pitched Drake. And so Drake got a chance to try out and made the cut for this TV drama called Degrassi. So I don't know if y'all are familiar with maybe One Tree Hill or Glee or maybe like Dawson's Creek or something along those lines, where it follows the life of a bunch of teenagers as they go through high school. And so it was a TV drama, very not like a hard life that you would normally hear a rapper talking about. And so it's just a very different intro for him. And even to the point that when asked about it, he really downplays it. He really is just like, it was just kind of a thing that I did for a little bit of time. When in fact, he was on 100 episodes of this thing. It went for years that he was a part of this. And he played an athlete who was struck by a school shooting and ended up in a wheelchair. And he was in a wheelchair for most of his time on the show Degrassi. But so this was how he got his start. This is what he became known for. It was through this that he was able to make a break into some of the musical atmosphere that up in Canada that he was able to get started in before coming in, making his name known with Lil Wayne and getting in with some of them. And that's really how he got his big break, was through a teen drama, which is very different than what you would normally see for a rapper. So just an interesting thing. He's not super open about it. It seems like he is very much a little bit ashamed, honestly, of that kind of point in his life. But that's really what gave him his break. And so tonight, what we're going to be looking at is a moment that God is very famous for. He's very known for, and we're going to look at how Daniel is able to be used through that to make God's name known throughout all of Persia. So to kind of set the stage of what's going on right now, Daniel has been interpreting dreams, interpreting handwriting, just doing all of these stuff to kind of make his name known as somebody who's faithful, somebody who can help out when needed. And so Daniel has kind of risen through the ranks and through the Persian Empire. And now he has just been named one of 3 high officials that are going to govern the entire land for the king. And so as we jump into Daniel chapter 6, just keep that in mind. Again, he is not a Persian. He is from Judah. So he originally was a slave, but he was handpicked were a few to be taught to kind of excel through that, to kind of show and help out with the king. So through this, Daniel has been extremely faithful and has just really set himself apart. Let's look at verse 3. It says, "Then this Daniel," again, the Daniel we've been talking about, "became distinguished above all the other high officials, and because an excellent spirit was in him. And the king planned to set him over the entire kingdom." And so Daniel was not like the others. He was very much next in line. He was extremely good at his job, and because of that, he was about to be recognized by the king to rule over the land second only to the king himself. And so let's continue on in verse 4. It says, "Then the high officials and the satraps," so you'd have had 120 satraps under the 3 high officials, divided up so that they could, rule over the kingdom and keep tabs on everything. So the satraps are just like if Daniel's a high official, they're like a lower official. So the king had planned to set him over everything, over the 3 high officials, over the satraps, everything. So as we jump back into verse 4, that's what that is. "So then the high officials and the satraps sought to find a ground for complaint against Daniel with regard to the kingdom. But they could find no ground for complaint or any fault, because he was faithful, and no error or fault was found in him. Then these men said, 'We shall not find any ground for complaint against this Daniel unless we find it in connection with the law of his God.'" You see, Daniel was known for a couple of things. He was known for his faith. He was known as a man who was going to go out and he was going to do his job every single day. To the point that these other guys, they also had his job. They were also doing very similar things. They're like, we really have nothing to complain about. They're like, we would love to get him thrown out. We would love to smear some mud over him and kind of disgrace his name a bit, but there's absolutely nothing that we can do that with. You see, Daniel was faithful not just when people were around him, but all the time. And so they thought, and they hatched this idea. They were like, if we're going to find something wrong with him, it's going to have to be in connection with his God, because that's the only thing that matters in his life. That's it. That is him. And so already we can see that Daniel is this extremely strong man of God. He's also an extremely diligent worker. He very much embodies this idea that Colossians gives us to do everything in word or deed for the glory of God, for God. We don't work for man, we work for God. And Daniel has really been embodying this as shown here. And so as we continue on, in verse 7, he says, "All the high officials of the kingdom, the prefects, the satraps, the counselors, and the governors are agreed that the king should establish an ordinance and enforce an injunction, and that whoever makes petition to any god or man for 30 days, except for the king, shall be cast into the den of lions. Now, O king, establish the injunction and sign the document so that it cannot be changed, according to the law of Medes and the Persian, which cannot be revoked." Therefore, King Darius signed the document and injunction. So basically what this is saying is they all got together and they were like, all right, this is how we get Daniel. This is how we do it. We make it to where he can't pray. We make it to where he can't go to his God. We make it to where he can't worship. Because they knew that Daniel would break that law. They knew that as a man of God, he would break that law. And then they'd have him. And so what they did is they appealed to the king's ego. So the king of Persia at this time would have been the strongest man around. Nobody could keep up with Persia. I mean, they were it. They were top dogs. And so the king would be head over everything. And so it would not be hard to say that this man had an ego considering he just signed a decree that said, you can't worship anybody except me for 30 days. Which is just crazy. Crazy, because that is some serious ego. But so the king, again, now the king liked Daniel. As we read earlier, the king was actually planning on giving him over to the kingdom. I mean, he was going to make him second in command. The king liked him, but his ego got the best of him. So let's continue on in verse 10. He says, when Daniel knew that the document had been signed, he went unto his house, where he had windows in his upper chamber open toward Jerusalem. He got down on his knees 3 times a day and prayed and gave thanks before God as he had done previously. So let's just think about this verse for a second. So Daniel knows that the decree is there. Daniel knows the punishment is to be thrown into the lion's den. And Daniel still goes and prays 3 times a day, as is normal for him. Can you imagine that? Can you imagine what that must have felt like, saying, God, you're worth it. You are worth me being thrown into the lion's den. Somebody can save me, but it has to be you. And so he continues on, and he's going before God, and the governors and the officials, they know exactly what's going to happen. They knew that either he was going to not worship God and fall out of grace, or he was going to worship God and get thrown in the lion's den. Either way, it's a win-win for them. So they followed him up, and look in verse 11. It says, then these men came by agreement and found Daniel making petition and plea before his God. So they came to the king, and they said, hey, didn't you make an injunction that anyone who makes petition to any god or man within 30 days except to you, O king, shall be cast into the lions again? The king said, yeah, the thing stands fast according to the law of the Medes and Persians, which cannot be revoked. Then they answered and said before the king, Daniel is one of the exiles from Judah, pays no attention to you, O king, or the injunction that you have signed, but makes petition 3 times a day. So these guys, their plan had worked. They thought they were going to be able to trap him up, and they did. But now Daniel's got to get thrown in the lion's den. And that's an instant death. What they would do is they would starve these lions so that when somebody was thrown in, they would be absolutely destroyed. These lions, they were fierce, they were hungry, they were starving to death, and so literally anything in there would just get absolutely devoured and torn apart. And so verse 14, then the king, when he heard these words, was distressed and set his mind to deliver Daniel. He labored till the sun went down to rescue him. Then these men came by agreement to the king and said to the king, know, O king, that it is a law of the Medes and Persians that no injunction or ordinance that the king establishes can be changed. Then the king commanded, and Daniel was brought and cast into the den of lions. The king declared to Daniel, may your God, whom you serve continually, deliver you. So we get this picture that the king is trying everything to be able to save Daniel. He's like, no, I like Daniel. This was not meant for him. This was meant for me and my ego, but I didn't mean to get Daniel hurt. I didn't mean for Daniel to get in the way. But you see, back in the day when Persia's made an injunction and was signed by the king, that was it. There was no going back on it. They didn't do these things lightly. The king had no choice. He had tied his own hands because of his own ego. But as he goes in, he says, may your God, whom you serve continually, deliver you. Again, Daniel was known for being a man of God. But so all that we've looked at so far is about Daniel. And again, I talked about at the beginning, this series is not about Daniel. This series is not about Drake or Mr. Beast or Elijah. It's a series about how did God become known? Well, God, Daniel is known for being a man of God, and that's really great and all. That's part of the equation. That's what Elijah was known for. But how is God known? So let's continue on and we'll be able to see that. Verse 17, a stone was brought and laid on the mouth of the den, and the king sealed it with his own signet and with the signet of his lords, that nothing might be changed concerning Daniel. The king went to his palace and spent the night fasting. No diversions were brought to him, and sleep fled from him. Then at the break of day, the king arose and went in haste to the den of lions. So basically what happened is Daniel was thrown in, they were sealed, and there was a signet placed that nothing could be broken until the king returned. He didn't want anybody to think that Daniel got any special treatment. He stayed there overnight in the den of lions. Again, hungry, starving lions. So verse 20, as he came near to the den where Daniel was, he cried out in a tone of anguish. The king declared to Daniel, O Daniel, servant of the living God, has your God, whom you serve continually, been able to deliver you from the lions? Verse 21, then Daniel said to the king, O king, live forever. My God sent his angel and shut the lions' mouths, and they have not harmed me, because I was found blameless before him. And also before you, O king, I have done no harm. Then the king was exceedingly glad and commanded that Daniel be taken up out of the den. So Daniel was taken up out of the den, and no kind of harm was found on him, because he had trusted in God. You see, Daniel was this incredible man of God who literally was spend the night in a den of starving lions and was able to come out with it with not a single scratch, with absolutely no harm on his head. This is absolutely something that could never have been done alone. It was something that only God could do. Again, this is how God is known. Jump ahead to verse 25 through 28. Then King Darius wrote to all the peoples, nations, and languages that dwell in all the earth. Okay, that's a lot. There's a lot going on in that sentence. Okay, he wrote to everyone, all nations, and all languages in all of the earth. That's a pretty big reach. Again, Persia would have been the big dog right here. They would have been outweighed everybody by a ton. And so the king writes this letter to everyone. He says, peace be multiplied to you. I make a decree that in all my royal dominion, so all of my land, everything that I reign over, people are to tremble in fear before the God of Daniel. For he is the living God, enduring forever. His kingdom shall never be destroyed. His dominion shall be to the end. He delivers and rescues. He works signs and wonders. In heaven and on earth, he who has saved Daniel from the power of the lions. So this Daniel prospered during the reign of Darius and the reign of Cyrus the Persian. Wow. I mean, that is absolutely incredible, because God was made known not just to the officials, not just to those who had set him up, not just to the king. God's name was known throughout the entire earth. Every people, every nation, every language, everywhere. King Darius wrote to all of them, saying that God is real. He delivers and rescues. He works signs and wonders in heaven and on earth. He has saved Daniel from the lion's den. I mean, the king was just completely beside himself that God could be this powerful. This is the same guy who just a couple of days earlier made a decree that no one could worship anyone but him. And now he is just like, hey, I want everybody in the world to know this God, because he's the real deal. He is the real deal. You see, God used a man who did not believe in him. He used a man who was so egotistical, he demanded that he himself be the only one worshipped. And God used a den of lions to make his name known throughout the entire world at this time. I mean, that's just absolutely mind-blowing that God would be able to put all of this together, that he would be able to use all of this for his good and for his glory. You see, God is most glorified when he's doing things in us and through us that we could not do ourselves. Elijah is not able to go into a valley of bones and make an army of people. Daniel is not able to go into the lion's den and come out unharmed. You see, the lions were hungry. Look back at verse 24. And the king commanded that those who had maliciously accused Daniel were brought and cast into the den of lions, they, their children, and their wives. And before they reached the bottom of the den, the lions overpowered them and broke all their bones in pieces. The lions were hungry. The lions were after him. It is only because of God that Daniel was not eaten before he hit the bottom. It was only because of God. And you see, that is when God is glorified. That is when his name is made known, not when he helps us ace a test. We can do that ourselves. Not when he, gives us a good day. We can do that ourselves. There's plenty of people that don't have God that have a great day. God is most glorified when he's doing things in and through you that you can't do on your own. You see, we just finished this study on dangerous prayers and being able to really reach into this idea that God is able to do so much more with our lives than we could ever imagine. And being willing to pray these prayers that just say, God, here I am. I don't know what you got for me. I don't know, but use me to make your name known. You see, that's when God gets the glory. When he's saving Daniel from the lion's den, when he's bringing a valley of dry bones to death. You see, you can make your name known doing almost anything. Counting to 100,000, making videos me now? Uh-oh. We're going to see if this works. Did that work? So what's the last thing y'all heard? Sorry, if you see me looking over here, it's where YouTube is pulled up. There's a pretty significant delay between what I say and like when it comes into YouTube. So, kind of waiting on somebody to answer a question I asked like 20 seconds ago because it just came through. I have no idea what y'all heard and what you didn't. Gotta love technology. When did it cut out? Anybody? Anybody remember the last thing you heard was? The Lions? Okay. All right, so yeah, the Lions were really hungry. I mean, back in verse 24, they were, they devoured everybody that was thrown in there before they even hit the bottom of the lion's den. So it's only by a miracle that through the work of God that Daniel was able to be spared from this. You see, the lions that were starving, they should have devoured him, but they didn't. So with that, oh man, this whole sound thing has just rocked me. I had a great ending the first time. Man, oh well. So anyway, so God used a law that stood against him. He used a king that didn't believe in him. He used a king that was so egotistical he thought that he was the only one on the planet that should be worshipped. And he used a den of lions to make his name known throughout the entire world. You see, God is so powerful. He's so glorious. He's so magnificent that he is able to use things that we could never dream of, that we could never do, to make his name known. And you see, that's exactly what he's looking for. He's looking for ways that we can't do to make his name known. You see, God isn't most glorified in the trivial day-to-day tasks that you can do on your own. God is most glorified when he is doing things in us and through us that we could never hope to accomplish on our own. Think back to last week, Elijah with the dry bones. Elijah could not sit there over this valley of skeletons and dry bones and say, hey, get up and walk. But yet God was able to take that and say, not just walk, but come together. I'm going to put flesh and bone on you, and I'm going to make you alive again. Daniel could never have dreamed of surviving the lion's den, but God says, not only are you going to make it all the way to the bottom, I'm going to let you spend the night there, and you're going to be just fine. We're going to take you out without a scratch on you. Something that was literally impossible. That is what God uses to make his name known. He doesn't use the God, please help me make an A on my test. He's not using the God, I just pray that we'd have a good day. Or that's not when he's most glorified. He's most glorified when you're saying, God, I don't know what you've got for me. I don't have a clue how this is going to turn out, but whatever you want, I'm game. Here I am, send me, use me for your glory. And when God makes something so incredible that we could never dream of this happening, that we could never imagine this possibility, that's when God is glorified. That's when his name is made known throughout the world. Verse 25 is just absolutely incredible to me. He wrote to all the people, nations, and languages that dwell in all the earth. I mean, God used this one instance to make his name known throughout the entire world in a way that Daniel could have never imagined. In a way that none of us could have ever done on our own. See, that's when God is glorified. We're able to make ourselves famous. We're able to get a start on a TV drama and make it somehow into the music career and then go multi-platinum. That actually seems not uncommon. When you've got, like these Disney people that go into the music industry. But that's exactly what Drake did. And now he's multi-platinum. He set all these Billboard records. I mean, it's super impressive what he's been able to do. But it pales in comparison to having the entire world know your name because you rescued a man from a lion's den. It pales in comparison to making all of the enemies of Israel know your name for freeing their people, restoring them, and breathing life into dry bones. You see, God is most glorified when he is doing things in us and through us that we could not do ourselves. And that is exactly what he's looking for. He is looking for you to say, here I am, use me in a way, do something that I could not imagine, but don't do it for me, do it for you. Let's pray. God, we thank you for this time that you've given us. I apologize that something happened and the sound went out, but we got back on track eventually. God, I thank you for giving us the opportunity we had to just dive into your word. I thank you for tonight. I thank you for all these students that jumped on here. And I thank you for just giving us the ability to make this happen, God. I thank you for your word. And I just pray that we would all open ourselves up to you, open our lives up to you and say, here I am. God, I don't know how, I don't know where, I don't know what, but use me. I just pray all these things in Jesus' name. Amen.